Timbermate Woodfiller has gained permanent residency here in my workshop for a number of years and for a number of reasons, but the main reason is I only need to use one filler. This product is solvent, latex and acrylic free. Now what that means, it's compatible with all coatings and stains. It's a 4-in-1 water-based wood filler, wood putty, grain filler, crack filler and even edge filler. And if you thin it down slightly with water, you can use it as a sanding sealer. Timbermate won't sink, shrink, crack or fall out. It has an indefinite shelf life. It's non-flammable, non-toxic, and you can use it to the last gram. And when it's dry, you can sand it, drill it, cut it, you can even drive screws into it. Now it's available in 13 colours plus a natural tint base, but really the amount of colours that are available to you is endless because you can simply mix and match any 2 or 3 colours together to make whatever colour you want. Just to give you an idea of how versatile this product is, I've got some various materials here on the bench. I've got white melamine, some pre-finished laminated board and some solid timber. This little piece of oak here is a perfect example because I've got a split down the face, my end grain is split, I've got a corner missing here and even my side grain has a split. So we can start on the face here. I've just got some oak, but this, just notice it's a little bit hard there, so all it takes, you don't need to pour any water in there, it's just a wet putty knife. Just take some out, just apply it on the surface. If you find it's still a little bit dry, it's only a matter of just dipping the putty knife in the water and just spreading it across the crack here. Just take your time, there's no rush. You just slightly overfill it, that way you can come back and sand it off. Squeeze it in. It's really easy to use. So that's the face sorted out. Now with this little corner piece missing here, now traditionally with typical fillers that are on the market, that's going to be difficult to fill because they shrink. And as we know, Timbermate won't shrink. It's going to make it a lot easier. So here I'm going to have to be filling an edge and an end. You might find if you do it in a couple of applications, just to build up that corner, just like that for now. Just let that dry and then we can come back and just top that one up and you would never know that corner's ever been missing. On the edge here, it's exactly the same process. Just fill the edge. And again, it's a little bit hard there, just a little bit of water. You don't need gallons of water. We're only dipping our putty knife into the water. Now that looks good. Now once that's dry, we'll sand it and you'll never notice the difference. And as I said earlier, the beauty of this product is as it dries out, we're just replacing the water to reconstitute it and make it more pliable. If that was any other product and it was dry, that goes in the bin. What I'm doing here, I'm just mixing some ebony with the natural tint paste because I've got a little of a ding here, a little bit of a mark in the pre-finished board. It's quite a dark wood grain colour, so I'm just getting the right colour here. Just needs a little bit more black, I think. Just mix that in. Just apply it to the surface. Just scrape that off with a plastic scraper. So wipe that down. Now that'll dry lighter, but just bear in mind it's going to, once we apply the finish, it'll go back to the natural colour. So what I'll do, once that dries, it'll go a little bit lighter. I'll just add a dab of oil. You'll never notice it. Now while that's drying, as I mentioned, as it dries, it'll lighten because the water's going to be evaporated. Now just to highlight that point a little bit, I've got some ebony here that's been drying out on the surface. If I take a new tub, the water is still present, so it's much darker. Now just to replicate as if I was going to apply a coating to this dry surface, just by putting some water on here, you can see that the putty is actually absorbing the water back in and changing the colour to the natural finish. I'm just going to show you another method here of mixing Timbermate. Now I mentioned earlier that there's 13 pre-mixed colours plus the natural tint base. Now you can mix any of those colours together and you can always make it darker, you just can't make it lighter. Just going to take some natural tint base. Using this gives me a neutral colour to start with. And as I mentioned, you can add solvent, water-based, whatever you like to this product. Now I've got some water-based food colouring here. Now as we all know, oil and water don't mix. I've got some solvent-based stain here. You can see how the water-based food colouring and the oil-based solvent not mixing. They're just rejecting each other there. But when I mix that with the Timbermate just binds those two together. So it just shows us when we add Timbermate to water and oil, they do mix. Believe it or not, occasionally even the best of us make mistakes. I've got a hinge recess here that I need to fill, so it's no problem filling it with Timbermate. I can speed dry it with a hairdryer and then reposition the hinge. Now it's very important that when we repositioning the hinge that you drill the pilot hole. You can always tell when the putty's nice and dry. There's no residual left on the paper, it just doesn't clog up the paper at all. As opposed to if I put some water back on here and then try to sand it, you'll see clearly now that's way too wet to sand. Now just a quick tip, anytime you're going to screw into the Timbermate, it's very important that you drill a pilot hole first. Here's another example for the cabinet makers. Sometimes you have your mounting plate in the wrong position and you need to move it slightly by less than the diameter of the hole. Well, no problem, I'll show you how to fix it. I've set up a melamine board here with my mounting holes there, so I can just fill these. Just take some white putty, just fill the holes. Don't spread it out too far because the mounting plate won't cover the whole area. Alright, so they're full now. Typically when this happens we're in a bit of a rush. Well, that's no problem either. No VOC and non-flammable, remember. Just get your heat gun. Now that's nice and dry. After a few seconds I can reposition my mounting plate. Just drill my hole. There you go. In less than a minute, the mounting plate is repositioned, ready for the door. I'm just mixing up a mix here of putty and water, just to use it as a grain filler, and that's the sort of consistency we're looking for. I want it to be able to flow nicely. And I've got a board here on my bench, and I've split it down the middle. I'm going to apply grain filler to one side, and I'll leave this side nice and raw. Now as far as filling, you've got a couple of options here. You can just dip a clean rag in the mix and then wipe it across the grain. It's important to go across the grain because then that forces it down into the bottom of the grain. Or you can just tip some onto the board and just use a flat spatula and again work across the grain so you force it down into the grain. Let's have a look. do circular motions here across the grain, and you want to fill it nice and full. Just take your time, no rush. All the way to the edges. Do the end grain, why not? You can just scrape off the excess. And just let that dry, that'll be ready for sanding. And if you've mixed too much, don't worry about that. We just pour it back into the tub of putty. Alright, so that's nicely filled and dry now, it's ready for sanding. A couple of tips with sanding, make sure you always sand with the grain. Don't be tempted to sand across the grain because you're just going to scratch the surface. And when you apply the finish, they'll just stand out like you know what. That's beautiful. That's ready for a finish. If you look at the surface here, you can clearly see this half where I've grain filled, it's nice and smooth. If I run the back of my fingernail across there, I can't feel any ridges at all compared to this side. You can even hear it probably on the camera. Now just remember, when you're sanding a large area, don't forget your safety gear. You need your safety glasses and a breathing mask.